The cargo ship shook violently as warning lights flashed red across every screen. Danny Cole gripped his seat with both hands and watched his father fight with the controls. The engines had failed without warning somewhere above the green and blue world called Velar 7. Greg Cole was a good mechanic and an even better pilot, but there was nothing he could do when both engines died at the same time. "Hold on, son," Greg shouted over the alarms. "This is going to be rough." Danny closed his eyes and felt his stomach drop as the ship fell through the clouds. The world spun around them. Metal screamed and groaned. Then everything went black. When Danny opened his eyes again, he was hanging upside down in his seat. His head hurt and his arms were covered in small cuts, but he could move. Sunlight streamed through a crack in the hull. The ship had crashed in a field of tall purple grass, and the front section was buried in soft earth. Danny unbuckled himself and fell to the ceiling, which was now the floor. "Dad," he called out. He found his father still strapped in the pilot's seat. Greg was unconscious, and blood ran down the side of his face from a deep cut on his forehead. Danny checked his breathing and found it steady, but his father would not wake up no matter how much Danny shook him. Danny was 14 years old. He had traveled with his father across dozens of worlds since his mother died 5 years ago. He knew how to fix engines and patch hull breaches. He knew how to read star maps and calculate fuel consumption. But he had never been truly alone before, and the fear that filled his chest was like nothing he had ever felt. He climbed out of the wrecked ship and stood in the alien field. The sky was pale orange, and 2 small moons hung near the horizon even though it was daytime. The air smelled sweet, like flowers after rain. In the distance, Danny could see smoke rising from what looked like a small village. He did not want to leave his father, but he knew he needed help. He could not carry Greg by himself, and the medical supplies in the ship were destroyed in the crash. So Danny started walking toward the smoke, hoping he would find someone who could help. The village was smaller than he expected. Simple houses made of dried mud and purple wood stood in neat rows along a dirt path. Gardens surrounded each home, but Danny noticed that most of them were empty or filled with dead plants. The people who lived here were not human. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Their fingers were long and delicate, and they wore simple robes made of woven plant fiber. When they saw Danny, they screamed. Mothers grabbed their children and ran inside their homes. Men picked up farming tools and held them like weapons. Danny stopped walking and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. He had heard about the people before. They were peaceful farmers who had never fought a war in their entire history. They were also terrified of humans. "Please," Danny said slowly. "I need help. My father is hurt." They did not understand his words, but they understood his tone. An elderly female stepped forward from the crowd. She was shorter than the others and walked with a slight limp. Her dark eyes studied Danny with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Danny pointed back toward the crash site. He made a gesture of someone sleeping, then touched his own head where his father was wounded. The elderly female seemed to understand. She spoke to the others in a language that sounded like singing, and after a long argument, several males followed Danny back to the ship. They carried Greg to the village on a stretcher made of branches and cloth. The elderly female, whose name was, led them to her own home and let Danny lay his father on a soft bed of dried grass. A healer came and cleaned Greg's wound and wrapped his head in bandages made from leaves. Danny sat beside his father and watched him breathe. Elder brought him water and a small bowl of food that looked like gray paste. Danny ate it even though it had no taste. He was too worried to care about flavor. As the hours passed, Danny looked around the village through the window of his home. He saw things that troubled him. The people were thin, much too thin. Their children moved slowly, without the energy that young ones should have. The food stores he could see were nearly empty. Something was very wrong here. A young male appeared at the window. He was about Danny's age, with bright, curious eyes that did not hold the same fear as the adults. He stared at Danny for a long moment, then ran away when Danny looked back at him. The next day, the young returned. His name was, and he had learned a few words of the common galactic language from traders who visited years ago. "You are human," said carefully, "from Death World." Danny nodded. Earth was called a death world by many alien species. It had extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, violent weather, and gravity that would crush most other beings. Humans were seen as monsters by some, survivors by others. "I am Danny," he said. "I am not dangerous, I am just a boy." Sat down across from him. "Why your father not wake?" "He hit his head very hard. He needs time to heal." Looked at the sleeping human man, then back at Danny. "You stay here, in village. Until my father is better, then we will find a way to call for help." Was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Danny's heart sink. "Village dying," said. "No food, plants all dead. 2 seasons now. Elder says we have maybe 20 days before we all starve." Danny looked out the window at the empty gardens and the thin, tired people walking slowly through the dirt streets. He understood now why their fear of him had faded so quickly. They were already facing something much worse than a human stranger. They were facing the end of everything they knew. Danny did not know what he could do to help. He was just a boy with a broken ship and an unconscious father. But as he watched a mother carry her weak child past the window, he knew he had to try something. He could not sit here and watch these gentle people die. He just needed to figure out what that something was. Danny spent the next 3 days learning everything he could about the crisis facing village. Became his guide and translator, sneaking away from his worried parents to visit the strange human boy who had fallen from the sky. Through broken sentences and simple gestures, Danny began to understand the full horror of what had happened. 2 growing seasons ago, strange winds had blown across Velar 7 from the northern mountains. These winds carried spores from a fungus that had never been seen before in this region. The fungus attacked the roots of the plant, which was the main food source for all people. Within weeks, every crop in and the surrounding villages had turned brown and died. They had tried everything they knew. They planted new seeds in different soil. They burned the infected fields and started fresh. They prayed to their ancient spirits and performed rituals that had protected their crops for thousands of years. Nothing worked. The fungus lived in the ground now, and any seed planted in the earth would die before it could grow. "Other villages same," explained as they walked through the empty fields outside. "All dead. Some villages already gone. People walk away to find food elsewhere, but nowhere has food." Danny knelt down and dug his fingers into the purple soil. It looked healthy to his eyes, but he knew the invisible enemy was hiding beneath the surface. They had no technology to fight something they could not see. Their simple farming methods had worked for countless generations, but they had no answer for this new threat. "What about the Galactic Union?" Danny asked. "Can they send help?" Shook his head sadly. "Nearest station very far, our ship slow. Message sent 2 seasons ago. No answer yet. Maybe they come, maybe not. Too late anyway." Danny stood up and looked across the dying landscape. In the distance, he could see the wreckage of his father's cargo ship scattered across a wide valley. The main hull had broken apart on impact, and pieces of metal and machinery were spread everywhere like the bones of some great beast. Most people would see only garbage there, broken junk with no value. But Danny had grown up watching his father turn scrap into working machines. He had learned that nothing was truly worthless if you understood how to use it. An idea began to form in his mind. It was small at first, just a tiny spark of memory from a lesson his father had taught him years ago. Greg Cole loved to tell stories about Earth history, especially the stories about humans overcoming impossible challenges. One of his favorites was about the early space stations, where astronauts had to grow food in sealed containers with no soil at all. Danny said slowly, "I need to see the crash site, all of it, every piece of wreckage. Looked confused but agreed to take him there. They spent the entire afternoon walking through the debris field. Danny examined every piece of broken machinery, every torn panel, every shattered container. He found water filtration membranes that were still intact. He found heating coils from the climate control system. He found cracked solar panels that still produced some power. He found plastic tubing from the fuel lines and metal containers from the cargo hold. Separately, these items were useless junk, but together, in Danny's mind, they started to become something else. "What you looking for?" asked as Danny loaded pieces of scrap into a makeshift cart they had built from hull panels. "A way to grow food without soil," Danny said. Stared at him as if he had gone crazy. "Plants need earth. Everyone knows this. Plants cannot grow in air." "They can grow in water," Danny said, "with the right nutrients and the right light. Humans figured this out hundreds of years ago. We called it hydroponics." The word meant nothing to, but the hope in Danny's eyes was something he could understand. For the first time since the blight arrived, someone was talking about a solution instead of just waiting to die. They brought the salvaged materials back to the village. Danny asked Elder for permission to use an old storage building that stood empty at the edge of. She agreed, though her eyes were filled with doubt. She had seen many young ones try to save the village with foolish ideas. She expected this human child to fail like all the others. But she also saw something different in Danny, a fire that burned behind his eyes, a stubborn determination that refused to accept defeat. It reminded her of stories she had heard about humans, about their refusal to surrender even when all hope was lost. Danny worked through the night, sorting materials and drawing plans in the dirt floor of the storage building. His fathers had survived the crash, and though the screen was cracked, Danny could still access the technical manuals stored inside. He read everything he could find about hydroponic systems, about nutrient solutions, about artificial lighting for plant growth. The knowledge was there. The materials were there. But putting them together would require skills Danny was not sure he possessed. He was not an engineer like his father. He was just a boy who had watched and learned and remembered. Returned the next morning with food and water. He found Danny asleep on the floor, surrounded by scrap metal and written notes. The young sat down beside his human friend and waited for him to wake. When Danny opened his eyes, asked the question that had kept him awake all night. "You really think you can do this, grow food from garbage?" Danny sat up and rubbed his tired eyes. He looked at the pile of salvaged materials and the plans scratched into the dirt. He thought about his unconscious father, the starving village, and the desperate people who had shown him kindness despite their fear. "I do not know," Danny admitted, "but I have to try, because if I do not try, then I know for certain that everyone here will die, and I cannot live with that." Was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and picked up a piece of plastic tubing from the pile. "Tell me what to do," he said. "I will help you." Danny smiled for the first time since the crash. He was still afraid and still unsure, but he was no longer alone. Together, they began to build. The storage building became Danny's workshop. Every morning he woke before sunrise and worked until his hands ached and his eyes could barely stay open. Helped whenever he could sneak away from his duties, and slowly the pile of salvaged scrap began to transform into something that looked almost like a machine. The basic design was simple. Danny built a series of long plastic tubes with holes cut into the top. Water would flow through these tubes in a continuous loop, powered by a small pump he had rebuilt from the ship's cooling system. The cracked solar panels would provide electricity during the day, and a salvaged battery would keep the pump running at night. The hardest part was creating the nutrient solution. Plants grown in water needed minerals and chemicals that soil would normally provide. Danny spent 2 full days hiking through the nearby hills collecting samples of different rocks and minerals. He crushed them into powder and mixed them with water, testing different combinations based on what he remembered from his father's manuals. "This one smells terrible," said, holding a container of greenish liquid at arm's length. "Good," Danny replied. "That means the minerals are dissolving. Now we just need to filter out the big pieces." They used torn fabric from the ship's cargo hold as filters. The liquid that came out was cloudy but free of solid chunks. Danny did not know if the mixture was correct. He did not have the equipment to test nutrient levels or chemical balance. He was working on hope and guesswork, and he knew that failure was far more likely than success. The villagers watched Danny's project with mixed feelings. Some thought he was wasting time and materials that could be used for something useful. Others admired his determination even if they did not believe in his strange ideas. A few of the younger began stopping by the workshop to watch him work, curious about the human way of building things. Elder visited every evening. She never said much, just watched Danny work and occasionally asked to translate a question. She wanted to understand what this boy was trying to do, even if she could not fully grasp the science behind it. "He says the plants will grow in water," explained one night. "The tubes carry food to their roots without needing soil." Looked at the half-finished system with her large dark eyes. "Our ancestors would say this is impossible. Plants belong in the earth. That is the natural way." Danny heard the doubt in her translated words and stopped working. He turned to face the village elder, choosing his words carefully. "On my world," he said slowly so could translate, "we learned that the natural way is not always the only way. Humans lived in caves for thousands of years because that was natural. Then we learned to build houses. We rode animals for thousands of years because that was natural. Then we learned to build machines. Sometimes the only way to survive is to find a new way." Listened to his translation and was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and placed her thin blue hand on Danny's shoulder. "You have courage, young human. Whatever happens, I want you to know that we are grateful you are here." Danny felt tears sting his eyes but did not let them fall. He nodded and returned to his work. On the 5th day of construction, disaster struck. The pump motor burned out because Danny had connected the power supply incorrectly. The smell of melted plastic filled the workshop, and Danny sat in the middle of the floor staring at the ruined component. Without the pump, the whole system was useless. Found him there an hour later, still sitting, still staring. "What happened?" asked. "I broke it," Danny said quietly. "The most important piece, and I broke it because I was careless. Now I have to find another pump somewhere in that wreckage, and I do not even know if there is one." Sat down beside him, "Then we go look." "It could take days. We do not have days." "Then we look fast." Danny looked at his friend. The young was thin and tired like everyone else in the village. His family was starving. His people were dying. But here he was, offering to help search through kilometers of scattered debris because a human boy asked him to. "Why are you helping me?" Danny asked. "Your people are afraid of humans. You should hate me for bringing more problems to your village." Thought about this for a moment. "My grandfather told me stories about humans before he died. He said humans were dangerous, yes, but he also said humans never give up. He said when humans want something, they find a way to get it no matter what stands in their path. He said this made them scary, but also made them worthy of respect." Stood up and offered Danny his hand. "I see you working day and night for people you do not know. I see you trying to save a village that is not your own. My grandfather was right. Humans are worthy of respect. So I will help you, Danny Cole. I will help you until this works or until we both collapse trying." Danny took his hand and stood up. Together they walked back to the crash site and began searching through the debris with new determination. They found a second pump near sunset. It was smaller than the first one and had a cracked housing, but the motor inside was intact. Danny carried it back to the workshop like it was made of gold. He worked through the entire night, rebuilding the pump and rewiring the power connections. By morning, the system was complete. Water flowed through the tubes in a smooth, continuous loop. The solar panels hummed quietly as they fed electricity to the pump. Everything was working. Now came the true test. Elder arrived with a small bag of seeds. They were the last seeds in the village, saved for some impossible future planting that everyone knew would never come. She handed them to Danny without a word. Danny carefully placed the seeds into small cups filled with growing material he had made from dried moss. He set the cups into the holes along the top of the tubes, so their bottoms touched the flowing nutrient water. Then he stepped back and waited. "How long?" asked. "I do not know," Danny admitted. "Maybe a few days, maybe a week, maybe never." The villagers gathered outside the workshop, watching through the windows and the open door. They had heard about the human boy's strange project, and now they wanted to see if the impossible could become real. Danny sat down on the floor beside his creation and closed his eyes. He had done everything he could. Now the rest was up to nature. The first 2 days were the hardest. Danny checked the seeds every hour, looking for any sign of change. The villagers came and went, their hope fading with each passing moment. Some began to whisper that the human boy had wasted their last seeds on a foolish dream. Others defended him, saying at least he had tried when no one else could. Stayed by Danny's side through it all. He brought food and water and kept watch over the system while Danny slept. The young had become more than a helper now. He was a true friend, the kind that stands beside you even when everyone else has given up. On the third day, Greg Cole finally opened his eyes. Danny was checking the nutrient levels when he heard a weak voice call his name from across the village. He ran to Elder's home and found his father sitting up in bed, confused but awake. The bandages had been changed many times, and the wound on his head was healing well. "Danny," Greg said, his voice rough from days without use. "Where are we? What happened?" Danny sat beside his father and told him everything. The crash, the village, the blight, and the desperate project he had been working on for days. Greg listened without interrupting, his eyes growing wider with each new detail. When Danny finished, Greg was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and pulled his son into a tight hug. "I am so proud of you," he whispered. "Your mother would be proud too." Danny felt the tears come then, all the fear and exhaustion and loneliness pouring out of him at once. He cried into his father's shoulder like the child he still was, despite everything he had done. They walked to the workshop together, Greg leaning heavily on Danny for support. When Greg saw the hydroponic system his son had built from crashed debris, he stopped and stared in silence for a very long time. "You did this yourself?" he asked. "Helped," Danny said, pointing to his friend who stood nearby. "And I used your manuals. I could not have done it without the things you taught me." Greg examined every part of the system with his experienced eyes. He checked the connections, tested the pump, and tasted a drop of the nutrient solution. A small smile crossed his face. "The design is good," he said. "Better than I could have done at your age, maybe better than I could do now." "But it is not working," Danny said. "The seeds have not sprouted. Maybe the nutrients are wrong or the water temperature or something else I missed." Greg looked at the small cups where the seeds rested. Then he looked at his son. "Growing things takes time, Danny. You cannot rush nature. Give it a few more days." On the morning of the 7th day, burst into the workshop with a shout that echoed across the village. Danny had been sleeping on the floor, too tired to walk back to his home. He jumped up and saw pointing at the tubes with trembling hands. Green shoots had emerged from 3 of the seed cups, tiny and pale, but unmistakably alive. Danny could not speak. He could only stare at those small green leaves pushing up toward the light. They were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Word spread through like fire through dry grass. Within an hour, the entire village had gathered around the workshop. who had mocked Danny's project, now stood with tears streaming down their blue faces. Children who had never seen a healthy plant in their short lives pressed their faces against the windows to look at the green shoots. Elder pushed through the crowd and entered the workshop. She walked slowly to the hydroponic system and knelt down beside it. Her old hands trembled as she reached out to touch one of the tiny leaves. "It is real," she whispered. "It is truly real." She stood and turned to face Danny. Without a word, she bowed deeply, her forehead nearly touching the ground. One by one, every in the village did the same. Danny felt uncomfortable with such respect. He was just a boy who had tried to help, but explained later that among the bow was reserved for those who had saved lives. It was the highest honor their culture could give. Over the next 2 weeks, Danny taught the villagers how to maintain and expand the system. More tubes were built from salvaged materials. More seeds were planted. More green shoots emerged. The workshop became a true greenhouse, filled with rows of healthy plants growing faster than anyone had ever seen in soil. Greg recovered enough to help with the engineering work. He improved Danny's original design, making the pumps more efficient and the nutrient delivery more precise. Father and son worked side by side, and the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. News of miracle spread to other villages. Representatives traveled for days to see the strange human technology that could grow food without earth. Danny and Greg taught them everything they knew, helping them build their own systems from whatever materials they could find. "You are changing our entire world," Elder told Danny one evening as they watched the sunset together. "Generations from now, our children will still speak of the human boy who fell from the sky and brought us back from the edge of death." Danny shook his head. "I just built something from trash. Anyone could have done it." Smiled, "But no one else did. That is what makes you special, young Danny. You saw garbage and imagined a garden. You saw despair and imagined hope. That is a gift more valuable than any technology." That night the village held a celebration. It was small because food was still limited, but the joy was immense. Music played, children danced, and for the first time in 2 seasons, the people have believed they would survive. Danny sat beside and watched the celebration with a full heart. His father sat nearby, smiling despite the bandages still wrapped around his head. "What happens now?" asked. Danny looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the orange sky. Somewhere out there, help was coming. Somewhere out there, the rest of the galaxy continued on without knowing what had happened on this small world. "Now we wait," Danny said, "and we keep growing." He did not know that help was closer than he thought. He did not know that everything was about to change once again. But for that one night, it did not matter. For that one night, there was only music and laughter, and the knowledge that hope had returned to village. The ship appeared on a clear morning 3 weeks after the first seed sprouted. It came down from the orange sky like a silver bird, its engines humming with a sound that Danny had almost forgotten. The Galactic Union patrol vessel landed in the same field where the cargo ship had crashed, and within minutes a team of officers in blue uniforms emerged. The villagers were frightened at first. They had never seen a ship this large or soldiers this well armed. But Danny ran toward the landing site, waving his arms and shouting in the common galactic language. The officers recognized him as human and lowered their weapons. "We picked up your distress beacon 4 days ago," the captain explained. She was a tall woman with gray hair and kind eyes. Her name was Commander Lisa Grant, and she had been patrolling this sector for 15 years. "We expected to find survivors, but we did not expect to find this." She gestured toward the village, where rows of hydroponic tubes now filled every available space. Green plants grew in long lines between the houses, their leaves bright and healthy under the alien sun. Children ran between the rows, laughing for the first time in seasons. "What happened here?" Commander Grant asked. Danny told her the story from the beginning. The crash, his father's injury, the dying village, and the desperate invention he had built from wreckage. The commander listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to disbelief to something that looked almost like wonder. When Danny finished, Commander Grant called her science officer over. Together, they examined the hydroponic systems, taking samples of the nutrient solution and scanning the plants with their advanced equipment. "This is remarkable," the science officer said. "The design is crude but effective, and the modifications for local conditions show real understanding of botanical science." "I just used what I had," Danny said, "and what my father taught me." Commander Grant looked at Danny for a long moment. "Son, do you understand what you have done? This fungal blight has spread across dozens of agricultural worlds in this region. The Union has been trying to develop solutions for months, but our methods require equipment and resources that most villages do not have. Your system can be built from almost anything." She knelt down to meet his eyes directly. "You may have just saved millions of lives." The next few days were busy and overwhelming. Union medical teams treated Greg and confirmed he would make a full recovery. Engineers documented every part of Danny's invention, creating detailed plans that could be shared across the quadrant. Scientists studied the plants and found them healthier than any grown in soil because the nutrient levels could be controlled so precisely. Elder invited Commander Grant to a formal gathering in the village square. The entire population assembled under a clear sky and spoke in her singing language while translated. "We are a simple people," said. "We have never traveled among the stars or built great machines. When the blight came, we thought our story was ending. We prayed and waited for death because we did not know what else to do." She turned to face Danny, who stood beside his father at the front of the crowd. "Then this child fell from the sky. He was injured and alone and afraid. We could have turned him away. Many of us wanted to because we had heard frightening stories about humans, but we showed him kindness instead, and he repaid that kindness 1,000 times over." Walked slowly toward Danny and removed a necklace from around her own neck. It was made of polished stones that sparkled like tiny stars. "This belonged to my grandmother and her grandmother before her. It is the symbol of our village, passed down through generations. I give it now to Danny Cole and name him a friend of Veeler, a true member of our people for as long as the stars burn in the sky." She placed the necklace around Danny's neck, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Danny felt the weight of the stones against his chest and the weight of their meaning in his heart. He had come to this world by accident, but he was leaving it as something more than a survivor. The next morning, it was time to go. The Union ship would take Danny and Greg to a station where they could arrange transport back to human space. Their journey together would continue, but first there were goodbyes to say. Came to see Danny at the landing site. The young held a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For you," said, "so you remember." Danny opened the bundle and found a small wooden carving of two figures standing side by side. One was tall and thin with large eyes. The other was shorter with round features and stubby fingers. And a human together. "I carved it myself," said. "My skills are not great, but the meaning is true. You are my friend, Danny Cole, my first true friend. I will not forget you." Danny hugged tightly. "I will not forget you either, and I will come back someday, I promise." They stood together for a moment, two young people from different worlds who had found something precious in each other. Then Danny walked up the ramp into the ship, the carving clutched in his hand. Greg put his arm around his son as they watched Veeler 7 shrink in the viewport. The village of was visible for just a moment, the hydroponic greenhouses glinting in the sunlight like tiny jewels. "You did good, son," Greg said quietly. "You did real good." Commander Grant approached them as the ship entered orbit. "I want you to know something," she said to Danny. "The Union is going to distribute your design to every agricultural world in the quadrant. We estimate it will save at least 12 million lives in the next year alone. Your name will be attached to it. The Danny Cole hydroponic system. Danny did not know what to say. He was just a boy who had wanted to help some people who were kind to him. He never imagined his simple invention would spread so far or mean so much. "I did not do it for fame," he finally said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Commander Grant smiled. "That is exactly why your name deserves to be remembered. Not because you wanted glory, but because you saw a problem and refused to accept that it could not be solved. That is what humans do best. That is why the galaxy needs us." The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, and Velar 7 disappeared behind them. Danny held the wooden carving tight and thought about an elder and all the friends he had made in village. He thought about his mother, who had always told him to be kind even when kindness was hard. He thought about his father, who had taught him that nothing was impossible if you were willing to try. And he thought about the future, about all the worlds waiting out there among the stars, about all the problems waiting to be solved and all the lives waiting to be saved. He was just a boy, but maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything.